Even this system in which we are now engaged, we do not know the system. We don't know the levers of the system. How the syllabi are being prepared, by whom, what is the thought going on in it, hardly we know. What are the systems of examinations, who are running those systems of examination, we do not know. What are the minds of children who are coming here, we do not know. What are the motivations of the parents who are sending the children here, we do not know. Teachers are drawn from different sides and we do not know the teachers. We don't have the time even to ask the teachers, tell me what are your problems, how do you feel? A good principal requires solid 2 years to understand every teacher properly. This is my personal experience. You join a school, if you really want to understand your teachers, only teachers, 100 teachers, 200 teachers, it takes 2 years to understand them to some extent. The systems have become so complex, so intricate, so intertwined, you don't understand. Now it is this condition in which you therefore find, ऐसा क्यों लगता है कि हम किसी के भी साथ न्याय नहीं कर पा रहे हैं? This is the basic answer to the question. The basic reason is that we are not able to understand what is all around us, what is to be demanded of us, and what we have to do for the others. And in this world today, hardly anybody is satisfied. The demands are increasing so much all the time. To satisfy the demands is a very difficult task. Therefore, we feel we are not doing justice. I do not blame anybody. If you feel that you are not able to do justice, please do not worry so much. There is only one way of doing justice to everybody. It is to be sure that you have done your best. That is the simple answer. Whether other people feel satisfied, not satisfied, happy, unhappy, it is a secondary thing. Not that it's not important, it is secondary. Ask yourself, have I done my very best to answer the questions or demands which are made on me? If you have done it, then do not scold yourself. Do not blame yourself. You have done your very best. For the rest we shall see tomorrow. This is the answer I could give. Fine. Now there is the third question. जीवन का उद्देश्य क्या होना चाहिए? यदि एक से ज्यादा लक्ष्य हों तो उनमें आपस में संतुलन कैसे रखें? What should be the aim of life? And if there are many aims or competing aims, then how to keep an equilibrium between them, how to satisfy them, how to harmonize them? This is also a very important question. There are, of course, many aims of life. There are competing aims of life. And we have to understand them. We have to see the balance of these questions. Even ordinarily, you find a teacher's life today is perhaps a very difficult life, most difficult life. I don't think anybody in any profession has such demands as the demands made on the teacher. The teacher is living in a family, husband or wife to be satisfied, children to be satisfied, parents to be satisfied, timetable to be kept. You may have your own school to come, the child has another school, the school timing of the child has to be maintained. Early morning you get up in the winter, 7 o'clock the bus comes, you have to send the child at the right time. You come to the class, you have to be a tiptoe in your class because the children know better than you in many respects. The children have got television at home, they have got videos at home, they have read so much, they have got internet, they can find out many things which you cannot find out in your own home. And you have to be up to date. You have to be 5 steps ahead of your children to be able to command respect, to be able to speak to them properly, somewhat authoritatively. And then the parents demand from you something which children do not demand from you. And you have to satisfy the parents. You may think that this child should not be pressed. Parents say that, no, you press it, my child. Give him a lot of homework, he is wasting time at home. And you feel that he should be given some free time, leisure, where he can think for himself. But parents are demanding something quite differently. And then, these are only ordinary questions. Then there are questions of aims of life to be developed in children, aims of life that we have to pursue, the objectives of society which have to be observed. Society demands one thing, morality demands something else, customs demand something else. You need to harmonize all of them. It's a very difficult task. This question of aim of life hardly comes in any other profession. A banker goes to the bank 10 to 5, and after that there are no questions on his mind as to what is the aim of life, how to meet the demands of parents or even those who put their money into the banks. No questions about that. System is rigidly laid down. You follow the rigid system and your banking work is perfect. But with the teachers it is not so. It is so flexible, so open, so vulnerable. Therefore, I do not want to tell you how you can answer this question. This is one of the most intricate questions. जीवन का उद्देश्य क्या होना चाहिए? यदि एक से ज्यादा लक्ष्य हों तो उनमें आपस में संतुलन कैसे रखें? To answer this question, I have to speak only of the aim of life, only on the aims of society, only of the aims of your family people, the aims of your students, and the expectations of the parents. These are the minimum things on you, on teachers, and you have to make some kind of balance among them. To be able to answer this question, I should have 3-4 hours entirely on this question, which I don't want to spend now at this time. So I will simply say, keep this question for the future. कृपया हमें समझाइए इन व्यस्तताओं के बीच भी स्वस्थ कैसे रहें? How to keep equilibrium, how to keep ourselves steady and sound, how to maintain well-being in spite of all these intricate problems and responsibilities which are on us. I do not know the answer to this question. For the other one I know the answer, but for this one I don't know the answer. To claim to answer this question I have to be God myself, because only God can answer this question. The true answer is rely on God. If you want to be absolutely in a state of steadiness, soundness, keep some time in your life when you can be simply like a child standing before God and say, please keep me with you and give me a bath of your love on me, and I want to be bathed by you. If you can do that, then He will answer and keep you in good state. Now there is another question here. What is the definition of satisfaction? The answer is, this cannot be defined. Satisfaction cannot be defined. It is not an inability to define. There are certain things which in their very nature cannot be defined. If somebody says, define color, color cannot be defined. If a blind man says, please tell me what is a color, there is no means by which you can explain to a blind man what is color. These are indefinable. What is knowledge? Supposing somebody says, what is knowledge? It cannot be defined. There are certain things which can only be experienced, certain things which can be lived. They cannot be defined. But you can describe. There is a difference between description and definition. You can describe, and description does not give you satisfaction, but it's a help, indication. So in that sense you can say, satisfaction is a state of being state of consciousness where for the time being at least you do not ask for more. A state of being or state of consciousness in which for the time being at least you do not ask for more. That's a state of satisfaction. Then you have to say there are levels and levels of satisfaction. There are physical satisfactions, vital satisfactions, mental satisfactions, moral satisfactions, spiritual satisfactions. And therefore there is a kind of a hierarchy of satisfactions. There are many rich people who are satisfied, you might see, in many ways. They can get any food they want to eat, satisfied. They can travel wherever they want, whenever they want, satisfied. They can hear any music whenever they like, satisfied. But if you ask him, are you satisfied with your capacity to write a good letter? Most of the rich people do not know how to write good letters. It's a fact. There is a great dissatisfaction among rich people in regard to the qualities and skills of the mind. To be able to find the right word for the right stage, for the right state of consciousness, they are not able to find it. They can spend hours and hours in improving upon a speech, short speech of 10 lines. They take 2 days only to write a good speech. which your principal can write in 5 minutes. But that rich man will take 2 days only to chisel even 10 lines. It's a great dissatisfaction he has got. How many people like to sing? And how few people can sing? Everybody would love to be a singer. Who does not like to be a singer in this world? It's a natural quality, natural ability in a human being. The one thing that distinguishes a donkey and a man is in the respect of the ability to sing. And everyone wants to sing. How many people are satisfied with their capacity to sing? Very, very few people. Similarly, there are many, many things regarding which we want, but we cannot be satisfied. And you may have many things, even morally you may be great. The Chandogya Upanishad says that a great teacher like Narada, he went to a teacher. Great teacher called Narada went to a teacher called Sanat Kumar and said to Sanat Kumar, teach me because I have sorrow. So then the teacher says, what do you know? He says, I know practically everything in fact. He gives a long list of all the knowledge that he possesses. And yet he is dissatisfied. Why? Because there is sorrow. And this is one of the greatest problems of human life. You may achieve anything, wonderful things in life. But there is something in man which is real sorrow. And the answer to that sorrow is only spiritual. And every human being ultimately seeks that fulfillment. And it is in that state that we need to reach. And teacher, to be a real teacher, should really be a seeker of that fulfillment. Because every child that is in your charge is actually seeking that fulfillment. He may not know that he is seeking that fulfillment, but he is really seeking that fulfillment. And therefore the greatest task of the teacher is to be the master of fulfillment. If we are not fulfilled, how shall we fulfill the children? This is the greatest demand on the teacher. That's why we may say that, please, I don't want to be a teacher, because the demand on the teacher is so great. But remember, this is a demand basically not only on teacher but on everybody. Therefore, even if you want to cease to be a teacher to get rid of this requirement, there is no solution. Better we are teachers, better we confess that it will take a long, long time for us to reach that point. It does not matter. A time will come when we shall be able to fulfill this condition also. When we are fulfilled, our children will feel fulfilled. Now there is another question here. There can be two aims of life. The question says there can be two aims of life. One is spiritual, another is worldly. And then says spiritual means awakening of real self. Who has put this question? Very good question this is. Can I know who has put this question? Very good question. Spiritual means awakening of real self, but then the person is not considered as a successful man in this world. Worldly, high post, earning lot of money, If he strives for getting a good post, fame and money, he is considered as successful in the world. But he loses the interest in finding his own self. How can we maintain balance between these two so both are achieved? And the further question is, both are achieved by the help of education. I think it's one of the most difficult questions. Let us try to understand the question and let us try to answer this question. I personally don't believe that there is a dichotomy between worldly and spiritual. There is certainly a difference of the emphasis. You can be both spiritual and worldly. I have seen many great men who combine the two things very well. You can be a captain of industry and you can live in God at the same time. And there is no conflict between the two. You can be a good pilot and you can be a great admirer of the skies and the wonders of the skies and therefore the infinity and therefore the creator of infinity. The two things can go quite well together. Many people believe that if you follow spiritual aim of life, you'll be useless for the world. Not at all. On the contrary, I personally believe if you really want to be useful to the world, if you really want to be practical, you should be highly spiritual. You cannot be really practical unless you are really spiritual. A practical man without spirituality emphasizes this or that or that or that. And he becomes absorbed in that. And he does not know really the skill of manipulating the forces of the world. There is a very fine sentence of Nehru. If you read that book called Aim of Life, you will find there is a chapter by Nehru in that book, Philosophy of Life. That is the title of the chapter. In which he writes autobiographically, he says, I am interested in philosophy, in metaphysics. I feel interested, he says, in Advaita, because when I read the argument of Shankara, I feel there is a great logic in it, and therefore I feel drawn into it. But then he adds, but I am deeply interested in the problems of life, problems of the world. And I want to devote myself to the problems of life and problems of the world. And therefore he says, I will put aside these deep spiritual metaphysical questions. Now this is the attitude which has flourished in the world quite a lot. Now, I myself was at one time greatly influenced by what Nehru has written. And in my search, I found that you cannot solve the problems of the world unless you tap the spirituality of man. And I came to this conclusion, very briefly I'll tell you how I came to this conclusion. When I was studying the problems of the world, I found that one of the most difficult problems of human life is that of poverty. So many people living below poverty line. And I began to ask myself how to get rid of poverty from the world. That led me to economic analysis. I studied economics from this point of view myself. So that if there is an economic answer to this question, we can apply it. While studying economics, I came to realize that so long as a capitalistic society remains as it is, we have no answer to the problem of poverty. So then I thought of communism. It was felt that in Russia at that time, it was the high tide of communism. So if you have machinery of the government in your hands, then you can order. Nobody will live in 5-storied bungalow. If you have 3 rooms and 5 children, perfectly all right. Whether you are wealthy or not wealthy, it will not be counted. You will no more be called wealthy. It is finished. In this way, everybody will be given housing, clothing, everybody will be maintained, sustained, food. It was a very interesting program, purely worldly problem, worldly answer. At that time, Soviet Union had not collapsed. It was in the high tide. But I could foresee at that time that this cannot be sustained. It is something that is not consistent with human nature. To put all people equal is contrary to the human nature. It's a very long question and very difficult debate one can have on it, but this was my perception. Secondly, you can maintain this kind of a situation only when you force people. And forcing cannot be sustained for long. And then I found that if people become equal as far as money is concerned, people seek power. And there is capitalism of power, not of money. But people begin to seek capitalism of power. I want to become more powerful. And I want to tyrannize over other people. So you may perhaps resolve the problem of bringing food, clothing and shelter equal to all the people, but you can't get rid of tyranny. Those are more powerful and less powerful. How will you sustain that society? How long? I had foreseen that the Soviet Union will one day collapse, and collapse suddenly, as it did ultimately. So you have either capitalistic society or you have communistic society, or you have socialistic society in between, which is worse. You are neither here nor there. And this is what has happened in India. We said we should have a socialist society in India. In 1991, we realized that we cannot sustain it. Privatization, bringing more and more capital from capitalists, inviting foreign powers to invest money in our country, what is called globalization. The whole tide is in a different direction. This was my question. Are we able to resolve the problem with which you started? And how many years you go on planning, working, and then collapsing? What is the real solution to the problems of poverty? What is the real solution of the problem of the hunger of power in man? What is the answer to tyranny in the man? It's only one answer. In fact, this is the answer given once by U Thant. I don't know if you have heard his name, U Thant. U Thant was at one time Secretary General of United Nations Organization. In 1967, he had studied all the problems of the world as much as an ordinary human being can study, even when he becomes an expert. And he said that we know today that the money that we are spending on war, even a fraction of it, is sufficient to provide good life to everybody in the world. Now, where is your economics? A fraction of the money that is being spent on war is sufficient to satisfy the hunger of the people of the world. You don't need economics of capitalism, socialism, communism. His answer was only stop war and ensure the whole world there will be no war in the future. The moment this is done, hunger is gone. You have enough already. Now, if you come to this question now, how will you ask people not to quarrel, not to go for war, or not to plan for war? I don't see anywhere accepting spread of spiritual oneness in the world. There is no other way. So if I want to solve economic problem, I don't see how that economic problem can be resolved unless you go to the plane of spiritual consciousness. And that is the only effective, it's not imagination. The only effective means by which you really can serve the world, you can bring heaven on the earth. It is possible, provided you work for unity of mankind, for love among the people, among the spiritual oneness of people. There is no other alternative. You can climb up anywhere in the world you like. You can say, I am concerned only with the world and with nothing else. Do it. You spend 1,000 years on it. It's guaranteed you will not succeed. As Sri Aurobindo says very clearly, spiritual solution is the only solution. And if people cry out saying, oh, impossible, then you have to tell very clearly to people, my dear brothers and sisters, if that is impossible, then what you are striving to do is impossible. If you are going to succeed, whatever you are trying, I only gave the example of economic poverty, but you go anywhere in the world, in any direction you go, if you are really seeking a solution to the problems in the world, there is no other way than the spiritual solution. Therefore, this dichotomy that if you are practical, you can't be spiritual, if you are spiritual, you can't be practical. My answer is that if you are really practical, if you really want to solve the problem of mankind, you really want to bring about the practical result, the only way is the way of spiritual consciousness. There is no other solution. It's a fact. You analyze the problems, you study it at the very great depths. In fact, I have spent 50 years only in the study of this problem. And I can tell you very convincingly, you try this way, you try that way, you try any way. You may have one economic advisor against another, you can have one political advisor against another, you can have one captain of industry against another. You bring all of them, the best. None has a solution to the problems of the world, practical problems, except by only one thing: development of spiritual consciousness. In fact, this very Nehru, Jawaharlal Nehru, in 1955, I had just passed my IAS examination and I was in Delhi in the what is called IAS training school. We were about 50 people, and we 50 people were invited by the Prime Minister Jawaharlal Nehru at his home. This was one of the programs of training the IAS officers, meeting with the Prime Minister one day. And when we went to him, he was very busy. He came from some meeting and he sat down before us. And the very first thing he asked us the question, tell me what is the most difficult problem of India? That was his question to all of us. And naturally we were all Nehruians at that time. We all believed that problems of the world, economic problems of the world, poverty, this is the most difficult problem of the world, or of India in any case. So in one voice we said, economic poverty. He said no. He said the problem is a problem of consciousness. You know, when he spoke, it was a different Nehru from what I had expected of him. Here was a Buddha speaking actually, it was not Nehru. He said the problem, the most difficult, the central problem of human life is the problem of consciousness. Then he turned into Hindi. जो हमको भीस आती है वो कॉन्शियसनेस के बारे में है. He said that is our real problem. He said poverty is a poverty of consciousness, and that is the problem. I think by the time 55, Nehru had become quite different from what he had written earlier in his book, The Philosophy of Life. He had come to realize that however much you try, he became the apostle of peace. For what? Peace is not an economic proposition. Peace is a spiritual proposition. His whole idea of Panchashil is coexistence, is a spiritual proposition. Therefore, to believe that practicality is something when you throw away the spirituality, or that if you become spiritual, you become unpractical, I don't accept this dichotomy at all. For the very sake of practicality, you cannot be truly practical, you cannot have skill, you cannot have quest of knowledge, all the things that I told you. You cannot be heroic. All these are practical things. If you really want to be practically a good teacher, you have to have heroism. You have to have quest of knowledge. You have to have skills. You have to have a condition in which you will not quarrel. These are spiritual propositions. All the four are spiritual propositions. Our idea of spirituality is not to go away from the world and sit down at some place and to remain inactive. No, spirituality is dynamism. As Vivekananda rightly said, play a football, that is spirituality. You kick a ball effectively, skillfully, wisely, that is spirituality. It's quite true. Do a thing practically, really practically successful, it is spirituality. It is this new science which combines spirituality and practicality, which has to be developed among all of us. A new attitude has to be created. This dichotomy is very injurious to the country and the world. Well, these are the questions you have put to me. I have tried to answer these questions. If you have any further questions, you can put to me. And then if you don't have, then I shall come back to the first question with which I started, those four things with which I started. But first, I can postpone those four things later on to some other meeting when I come again to Lucknow and I can be with you. Let those four things remain with you for quite some time. But if you have any questions, I would like to hear your questions and have the delight, joy of talking to you. In spite of the spread of communication, man is lonelier today than ever before. Is it really true? Is man lonelier today than ever before? In a sense it is true. In a sense it is not true. Today the world has become so packed, so crowded, particularly because of spread of communication. They hardly get time to be alone. If your television runs up to 2 o'clock at night and you get up at 11 o'clock in the morning when the day is already half on and when the work is pressing upon you and you just join up with the work and go on and on and on, you don't get time for yourself at all. But it is true that any moment you feel that you want to be alone, and even if you get half an hour to be alone, the pressure of loneliness is so great that you really feel a vacuum. And that sense of vacuum makes you feel lonelier than ever before. So it is true in that sense. Our sense of loneliness today is much more acute than what we had earlier. But this question is not enough. This is a good observation. It expresses anguish today, but there is no further question as to how to deal with it or what is to be done. So I'll reserve the question later on. I only say that today it is true that when you feel you are really alone, once in a while you do feel tremendous vacuum. And that sense of vacuum makes you feel that you are lonelier than ever before. J?
Growing up children, they don't value time and money. They don't respect it. So how to teach them that it is important in this? So many diversions are there. And they are pampered by their parents. They are not focused.
This is a good practical question. The children today do not value time. I don't know, actually I would like to discuss with you this question a little more intimately. I hear this complaint about children from many parents, and it's a fact that children of today, they are looking for something, they are striving to be something, and we are not able to touch their heart in the way in which you would like to touch their heart. It's a malady of our society today, not only in India but all over the world. We are not able to understand what are they looking for, what do they want. If you look truly into this problem, you will find that there is what we may call center of gravity. Any society you go to, any family you go to, if you want to understand a society, if you want to understand a family or an individual or even a culture or a civilization, you must ask the question, what is the center of gravity of the individual or the family or the society or the country or the world or civilization? What is the center of gravity? The center of gravity is that towards which you normally, automatically as it were, you gravitate. Take for example, the time of the Upanishads. It is the one time about which we have some kind of vision. This is the greatness of our culture. If there is one good memory in our race, in our India, it is a memory of the time of the Upanishads. Why? Because of in a few pages, that age of Upanishads has been described in the Upanishads. What is that image? A teacher sitting in his hermitage. All around is a forest. There is great quietude. And this teacher is approached by young boys. It may be Nachiketas, it can be Shvetaketu, it can be Satyakam Jabali, or it can be a prince, can be a king, Ajatashatru, or a great teacher like Narada coming to Sanat Kumar. The teacher may be a cart driver like Rekwa. The teacher may be a great rishi, great sage. But there was a center of gravity. Everybody felt that he must find out a teacher. In fact, this is even today to some extent is alive. I have met many people in India, they say, I want to have guru. And say, oh, my guru is so and so, my guru is so and so. Even today, that tradition continues to some extent. But in that time, it was a natural center of gravity to find out a teacher. To be tested by the teacher. When you went to the teacher used to ask you 20 questions. Even to be admitted by the teacher was a great glory. It was not easy to be admitted so easily. And then to remain with the teacher for years and years and years and years and years. 12 years was minimum. Then we did 4 years, or 36 years, or 48 years. This was the measure. You become yourself a teacher in due course. So this is the center of gravity as we had in India at one time. Today, our children are not asking, I want to go to a good teacher. He is not looking for a teacher. That center of gravity is gone. There is something else. What is the center of gravity? If you ask this question, what is the center of gravity? The center of gravity today is a style or system of life in which you need all kinds of services that will make your body comfortable, your desire satisfied to the degree to which you want to be satisfied, and to be able to fall into what is fashionable, and rest of the time to be amused by music, by art, by cricket, sports of various kinds, and company. I don't say parties because everybody doesn't have money enough to go to parties. This is the center of gravity today. And this is all over the world. Even the poor children today are looking for this. If you ask the question, why has it happened? It is because first of all, the progress of scientific knowledge has made things quite easy. Science has put up before us gadgets of various kinds. And we can utilize these gadgets very easily to get certain satisfactions. What Akbar took 1 month to organize a dance for his courtiers, if he wanted his courtiers to be happy and pleased, he used to say, I will arrange one dance by a very great art dancer one day. It takes a long process of organizing the dance of one dancer one night. Today, on a television, you can see 7 dances of that kind in one single night, without any trouble at all. So you can measure the time taken by Akbar the emperor, and you just switch on here a television and you can sit before the television. In one night you can see 7 dances which even Akbar could not witness in his own lifetime. Today anybody can see it. This is only one example I am giving to show why the center of gravity has changed. When facilities are available all around you, in which the needs of the body, needs of the vital force, amusements of all kinds are just available to you or can be made available to you, then people will naturally ask for that. Of course, you need money for it. The more money you have, the greater the facility for having these kinds of enjoyments, stability, security. Therefore, today there is a run for money on one side and money to be utilized for this purpose. This is center of gravity. Now, if you examine in terms of human civilization, you might say that this is a return of man to barbarism. In a barbarism, man seeks physical comfort, physical stability, and physical enjoyment. This is the sign of a barbaric. He doesn't have quest for knowledge. He does not have a real pursuit of beauty or art or music. It is simply physical comfort, and this science has made it very easy. This is not a case against science. I am only saying that science has made it easy for us. Of course, it has made science very fashionable. Therefore, if some bright student wants to do something, he wants to become a good scientist or engineer or technologist of some kind. But because all the techniques that he has got will be used ultimately for this purpose. Center of gravity is this. It is easier for man to seek these satisfactions, and therefore the seeking is all instruments by which this seeking is satisfied. What is to be done? This is analysis of why or what is happening. But if you ask the question, then what is to be done? It is there that the teacher's roles are very important. I spoke at the beginning of 4 dogmas. The present center of gravity is being served because of 4 dogmas which are ruling today in the whole world. It is only if you break those dogmas that this center of gravity can be changed. I'll explain to you.